General quarters. All hands man your battle stations.
Welcome to WETSU, a podcast produced by the Battleship New Jersey. Today, we're honored to be joined by Admiral Reason, United States Navy retired. Among his many assignments throughout his 34-year distinguished career, Admiral Reason served on the USS New Jersey when she was the flagship for Battle Group Romeo, for which he commanded. Admiral Reason retired as a 4-star admiral in 1999. He served as commander of the U.S. Atlantic Fleet, now known as Fleet Forces Command. At the time of his appointment, he was the first African-American to attain the rank of 4-star admiral in U.S. Navy history. Admiral Reason, we thank you for joining us on the podcast, sir, and on behalf of the current crew of the Battleship New Jersey, we thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Just looking through your story career and sort of seeing what we see today in today's Navy, having become familiar with some of our members of Congress, we've seen that, today's day and age, the members are inundated with requests from constituents to enter military service academy. From what I read about you, it was sort of the other way around. That Congressman Charles Diggs Jr. actually reached out to you to persuade you to join the Naval Academy. I was wondering about that and what he said to you to persuade you to apply to Annapolis, especially after having already done 3 years of college and then essentially starting over. Can you tell us about that and how that came about?
Well, sure, I can do that. Congressman Diggs, who was from Detroit, had nominated 10 young men of color, and there were no females going to service academies then. He had nominated 10 young men to the Naval Academy, none of whom were selected for an appointment and none of whom were allowed to enter. And he was concerned that it might be a matter of discrimination, but he wasn't sure. So he mentioned this to his wife, who was a federal judge at that time in the state of Michigan. And he said, I don't know how to test this. And she said, well, I know a fellow who had taken the entrance exams for the Navy 3 years ago, and he passed them with flying colors, but he did not get a Naval ROTC scholarship. The selection was made by educators from his region, and his region ran from Washington, D.C., where he lived, to Atlanta, Georgia. And the selection panel was not made up of Navy personnel, but of educators from that region. And educators in that region in 1958 were not willing to select a person of color to have a full ride Navy scholarship. But I passed all the exams. And interestingly enough, I didn't know this at the time, but a white naval officer came to my home one Saturday morning and said, Paul, I'd like to talk to you for a minute. And he said, you were not selected because of your race. He said, what I want you to know and to understand is that there were 300 people, young men, competing for these appointments. And after we all had physical exams, we had college board type exams, we had officer qualification type exams, just a whole slew of exams. And he said, what I wanted you to know is that of these 300 people competing for these appointments, you ranked number 2. And you should understand that the only reason you did not get a Navy ROTC scholarship that paid all books, tuition, and you get paid as well for your college education was a matter of race. So Congressman Diggs' wife, who was the sister of one of my childhood friends, knew of this. And so she said, you need to talk to Paul. And he approached and said, you don't have to accept an appointment if you get it. I just need to know that it's not a matter of lack of qualification why these other 10 young men were rejected. So I took all the exams again. It's sort of nice taking college boards for the second time. And I was offered an appointment. At the time, my parents were moving overseas to Burma. I was doing a contract at the University of Rangoon to put books in the use a librarian by vocation, to put books in the new library they had built at the university. So they were leaving the country. I said, I'll go to the Naval Academy. I really always thought I wanted to be a naval officer. So I accepted the appointment and went to Navy in June of 1961.
And you mentioned that one of your first assignments out of the Naval Academy was in Camden, New Jersey, where obviously the battleship is now moored, or will be again as soon as we return back to Camden from dry dock. What did you do in Camden? Where did you live in? Did you live in New Jersey?
Oh, sure. After graduation, I spent a year in training as a nuclear engineer. And 6 months of that was in Bainbridge, Maryland, which no longer has a naval station. But that's where I learned all sorts of reactor science and higher math and physics and so forth. Then we had a land-based prototype for training in West Milton, New York. So we spent 6 months there. And from there, I was assigned to my first ship, which became USS Truxtun, a nuclear-powered guided missile cruiser being built at New York Ship in Camden, New Jersey. So we moved from upstate New York, Saratoga Springs, to Camden, New Jersey to join that ship under construction. My wife was pregnant at the time, and we got an apartment in Haddonfield and lived in Haddonfield, and our first child was born while we were stationed there. We had to go across the Walt Whitman Bridge to get to the Philadelphia Naval Hospital. Mm-hmm. That used to be right there at the bottom of, it's at Broad Street.
Yep.
So we have very fond memories, and we ate a lot of Campbell soup there. I'd grown up with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Still a major company in Camden, major employer in Camden. Well, that's a small world. The history of coming to Camden, now serving on the battleship. Now the battleship's back in Camden. Incredible history. In 1964, you met then Captain Hyman Rickover, a meeting which you've credited with changing your career. And in a nutshell, I guess, the situation is, at the end of the day, you stood your ground. I guess my question to you is, in that type of situation, a young officer, almost, what gave you the courage to do that at that time?
Well, Admiral Rickover asked me a hard question. He said, you have a lot of education, but you don't stand number one in your class. Why is that? And I said, well, you will notice that I followed a different curriculum than most of my classmates, because I was able to validate, that is, not take classes in the standard curriculum. And there were 22 of those courses I didn't have to take. So I was taking, my first year, I went to class with most of the seniors, which was, and then I took a group of electives that were wonderful. I'd learned Boolean algebra as a senior in college, where most people are in the fourth grade. But that was not known when I was in fourth grade. So it was really quite a nice educational experience that I enjoyed at the Naval Academy. So I said, there are other people who work a lot harder than I do because they're learning things for the first time. And I said, I am learning a lot about the Navy, not just about the academic endeavors at the Naval Academy. So he said, well, if you will increase your class standing by 20 numbers by graduation, you got the promotion. And I said, Admiral, I can't. He said, I want you to swear. And I said, sir, I cannot swear to it. Well, why not? Because if people who are ranking ahead of me get all A's, and I get all A's, my relative standing will not change. You're a disgrace. Get out of here. And there was a gentleman who grabbed my shoulder and led me out of the office. They had me sit in a waiting room for probably about 12 hours. Close to midnight, the deputy to Admiral Rickover, Mr. Wagner, Mr. Wagner came and said, Midshipman, come with me. We went into a small office. There was a wonderful older woman who was sitting. And he said, I have a statement I need you to sign. The statement swear I will move my class standing by 20 numbers before graduation. And I said, I make a couple of edits. I said, I will do everything within my power to increase my class. And I said, I promise you I'll get all A's, but I'm pretty sure I can. But I can't swear that I will increase my class standing, so I cannot sign this. And he said, well, that's not what the Admiral wanted to hear. I went back to the waiting room. One of my other classmates was there. They put us in a car, took us back to Annapolis. The next morning at 6:45, they posted the roster of people who had been selected for nuclear power. I was the second and first. So I just held my ground, but I guess Admiral Rickover, who I got to know fairly well over the years, respected my unwillingness to sign.
Incredible story from someone who's still a midshipman. That certainly speaks to.
Well, I was older. I'd been in college before.
Absolutely. And then from 1976 to 1979, you served as a naval aide to the President of the United States. First, I understand the later years of President Ford's term, as well as then into President Carter's term. So what did you, first of all, how did you end up in that type of a role? Obviously, very few get to serve in that sort of capacity. And I'd love to hear what you enjoyed about it, what you disliked about it. Obviously, a very unique opportunity.
I was assigned to the Bureau of Naval Personnel right outside of Washington. And I guess that was
1970s.
Yeah, I guess 76. And so the Navy was asked to send over a group of officers for interview, and we were interviewed at the White House. About 10 of us went over. I was one of the 10. We were interviewed by Jack Watson, who was one of President Carter's trusted aides, who had worked with him for years. And from that series of interviews, I was offered a job as naval aide to the president. And President Carter said, like an admiral, I only need one aide. And the Secretary of Defense took maybe 3 weeks to convince him he needed to have at least 2 aides. He said if one aide breaks a leg, is not available, his role in the national defense is compromised. So we require him to have 2 aides. And he said, I'll take the Navy guy and the Air Force guy. Well, I was the Navy guy. So I was offered the position of naval aide to the president, and a fellow named Bob Peterson, who was an Air Force captain or major at the time, I guess, was offered the job as Air Force aide. And the two of us did the job that normally had a person from every service.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So, the two of us were, as we would say in the Navy, we were on port and starboard. And when one person is with the president and an aide is with him anytime he is outside the fence of the White House, and then you're also preparing for the next day. So it's called advancing.
Mm.
And so one of us is advancing the next day, one of us is with president. And that rotation kept us very busy.
Sure. What did you enjoy most about that assignment?
Enjoyment is not, it was very taxing. What I least enjoyed was that even though my family was living 4 miles from the White House, I would often get home late at night and leave early the next morning. So I didn't get to enjoy my family and what was really my first real shore duty. And, but it worked out. And working very closely with and for President Carter was one of the joys of my life. He was one of the only truly honest men I've ever had a chance to work with.
In today's, day and age, and the Hollywood style of an interest in the office of the presidency, and the lore around the nuclear football. Obviously, I'm sure that's something you were very familiar with. Anything you could talk to us about that you're able to say about that sort of responsibility and how you felt, I guess, sort of literally holding that responsibility in your hands every day.
But you see, Marshall, those are President Carter's stories. It's his presidency. He's the one who tells how things were carried out, how things were executed, how things were done. Those are not my stories. So I usually really don't talk about it, especially when it's in a forum where it can be replayed several.
Why, that's I appreciate that, and certainly that perspective is one that's certainly not unexpected.
Also, I'm up in years now, so perhaps my recall isn't as good as it might be otherwise, or might have been earlier.
In 1988, you were placed in command of Cruiser Destroyer Group 1, and then soon later, Battle Group Romeo, seeing service across the Pacific and Indian Oceans and in the Persian Gulf. What led you to take the USS New Jersey as your flagship?
That was my military assignment. Those are orders.
Okay.
I didn't choose.
Okay.
I was ordered to command of Battle Group Romeo, as I was ordered to command of Cruiser Destroyer Group 1, which was a large number of ships homeported in San Diego. And we had, I believe, 2 Cruiser Destroyer groups stationed or homeported in San Diego. And as a result, one of us might be deployed like I deployed with Battle Group Romeo, and the other group commander would husband my ships, the ones that were normally assigned to Group 1, for inspections and oversight and guidance and so forth. And so when I went to sea with Battle Group Romeo, I went from command of, actual hands-on command of about 30 ships to the smaller battle group, but it was at sea. It was a command at sea, and it was wonderful. It was every naval officer's, dream come true, to command a group of ships at sea. And people said, well, wouldn't you rather be on an aircraft carrier? I said, I spent most of the Vietnam War on the carrier Enterprise. It was wonderful to have the alternative to be assigned to the Battleship New Jersey as my flagship for Battle Group Romeo. So I was truly, truly pleased with that outcome.
One of the questions that we get asked a lot, especially when we're doing tours, and at the Admiral's cabin being right on the other side of the wall from the captain's import cabin, is what's the relationship between an admiral who's serving on a ship versus the captain of the ship? Obviously, you had different responsibilities, but that's a question that we get a lot. How was your relationship with then Captain Tucker, and how did you two really interact in those roles?
Uh, uh, Captain Ron Tucker, now Admiral Ron Tucker, was the commanding officer of New Jersey. It was his responsibility to determine everything that happened day in and day out on New Jersey. The crew worked for him. Now, he worked for me, as did the captains of several other ships that were in company with us. So I had really no direct hands-on responsibility for what happened on New Jersey on a day-to-day basis. My responsibilities were to call the shots for the entire battle group. So we had, he was driving the ship, but I'm the one that determined where the whole battle group went.
Right.
And so it was, and we had just a wonderful relationship because he was also like my landlord. My cabin was in his condo, and we worked very closely together. He was a wonderful, very talented naval officer. And as we traveled on that deployment, our wives also came to the Western Pacific, and it turned out they had birthdays on the same day of the same year.
Wow.
And Christy and Diane were really a very nice addition when we were overseas and entertaining and so forth. And there's a little sea story. We were in Hong Kong on their birthday, 16th of November. And Ron and I had, sort of gotten our heads together, and we said we were going to buy them fur coats for their birthday. And we went to, I wish I could remember the name of that store. I can't. But we went to the largest furrier in Hong Kong and chose beautiful mink coats. So the owner of that store was born on the 16th of November.
Wow.
And he pulled out his driver's license, said, "You won't believe this, but 16 November." I said, "But you're not the same age that they are." He was significantly older, but he was very, very gracious. So we have our own little sea stories.
And you mentioned serving on the USS New Jersey and someone you met at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Vice Admiral Doug Katz, who served commanding officer of the Battleship New Jersey. What were your thoughts on serving with then Captain Doug Katz?
Oh, yes. Well, Doug Katz and I go back to June of 1961 when we were both plebes at Annapolis at the Naval Academy, and I knew him. We got to know each other during that summer, and we remained close ever since that time. And when I was a 3-star, I guess, I was commander of the surface force in Norfolk and all of the surface ships in the Atlantic Fleet. I got orders to Washington, and that was my first Pentagon tour, so it was interesting. But Doug relieved me, and he had been in Bahrain, and it's the 5th Fleet Commander, and Doug came to Norfolk and was one of the 3 stars and relieved me. And as it turns out, we didn't have a face-to-face turnover because he was coming from the other side of the world, and I was going to Washington, where you have to be here at this time on this day or else. So he's a very fine person. I consider Doug and Sharon Katz among our lifelong friends.
Interested to hear your thoughts about what your favorite thing was about serving on the USS New Jersey.
Oh, Marshall, that's tough. I really believe serving on any or every Navy ship on which I served, the true amazing value of that experience is the sailors. Really, they're amazing individuals. They do things that you don't anticipate that are focused on delivering a mission in the best possible way. And, and they surprise you. They do things you don't ask them to do, but things they know need to be done. And when I talk about sailors, some of those sailors are 18 years old and some of them are 53. And you don't know which one is going to step up and really lead to the success of what you're trying to accomplish. But it's amazing how quickly they do and how many will. And so serving with people who've chosen at usually at a young age to serve their country is always a wonderful experience. So that's the proof of the pudding that this is a great country with great people.
You were put in command of Battle Group Romeo. Love the listeners to hear your thoughts and impressions of commanding the battle group and the lessons learned from it.
Well, that's probably a book that could be written. And, the hard part about being in a combat area and being in a tense, politically charged environment is that you live minute to minute. You can't plan what you're going to do tomorrow at noon because the situation will be different. And you have a large staff that is focused on many different factors, from intelligence to how much fuel you have. Do you have enough food for the thousands of people who are with you? And is there anything that's going to disrupt your tanker that's coming in to deliver the fuel that you're going to need in 3 days or something? And, you have to figure out how to best accommodate the needs of your crew and the crew of the other ships. And that's all inside, basically. Yeah. But then you have to be concerned and project what the people who are opposed to your presence there might have in mind, and you look for tippers. You evaluate your intelligence, and you make sure that you're in your best defensive posture. And then, fortunately, while we were in the Persian Gulf, no one chose to shoot at the battleship because they knew we could shoot back. And most people don't realize that each one of the 16-inch guns on a battleship can throw a high explosive projectile, 25 bombs. And that's projectile really is about the size of a VW bug filled with explosives. So it's a pinpoint accuracy, a deadly projectile. So people have to think twice if they're going to cause trouble, and they didn't.
Yeah.
When I hear you tell it that way, I think to a quote from the former commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps, General P.X. Kelly, and his comments about the battleship service off the coast of Beirut. Just the presence of the symbol of the battleship was enough to encourage a ceasefire.
I knew PX when he crossed paths up in Seattle a long time ago. And he was a very insightful leader.
In 1996, you were mounted for your 4-star as commander of the U.S. Atlantic Fleet. Interested in hearing your sharing what it felt like at the time, and then also now looking back on it so many years later, how you sort of feel about it all today.
Well, I don't know, Marshall. It's kind of tough to encapsulate how you feel going through a naval career, and being African American. There are a lot of things I did for the first time, if you will, but that wasn't why they were done. That wasn't why, at least as far as I know, why I got certain assignments. There may have been more assignments I didn't get than I did get because I was African American. but you don't have visibility to those things, And in the military, orders are orders. So when I get ordered to command the USS Kuntz, I pack my parachute bag and my cruise box, and I report for duty. And when I got orders to command USS Bainbridge, there were only probably 2 officers in the whole Navy who were not currently assigned who were qualified for that job. And I was one of them, and I got command of that ship. The other guy got command of another ship just a few months later. So I can't evaluate that because I don't have visibility. All I could do was what I was committed to do from the day I was commissioned, and that is do my very best job for the Navy, for the nation, for my family, and for myself. And so I did, and that led to a promotion to 4 stars and assignment as Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Atlantic Fleet, which was a magnificent job. I was in command of half of the Navy. And that's ships, submarines, airplanes, shore stations, and seas bases, and just list a number of things with a huge budget and billions of dollars. But I had a lot of help. I had a staff of 450 people. People said, isn't that exorbitant? No, that's what was needed. Those were not excess people. Those were people who were specialists in small areas of what it takes to run hundreds of ships and a couple 100,000 people.
Are there any memories that particularly stick out to you from your time as kind of recent? Sort of favorite memories?
I don't know. Probably there are too many competing memories. We did a lot of travel and a lot of international relations. I probably got to know every leader of every Navy that bordered the Atlantic, and that's from Russia to Argentina. We visited the Russian Navy, and the Russian Navy visited us. I was with the Argentinian Navy. I was at the very southern tip of South America, and but they also came to Norfolk. So there are just hundreds of days of interest and importance that you do, and sometimes you have a lot of them that come on the same day, and you need staff to help you choose which ones you must do and which ones your deputy can do. So it's just a very fast-paced few years in your life that each day is moving you forward at a pace where you say, wow, this is really fast and really important. And you have to choose what things you're going to do and what things you can't do because you can't do it all.
Sir, I came across an op-ed in June 2020 written for the U.S. Naval Institute by a retired captain, Chris Bott, who served on New Jersey as a junior intelligence officer on your flag staff. He wrote about the challenging navigation up the Columbia River in Oregon. There you had protesters hoping to stop the battleship in protest of the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And Captain Bott says, Admiral Reason had a different perspective. We fight for this group's right of free speech. This is what sets us apart. We're protectors of those rights. In a calm, commanding counter to conventional wisdom, which was something close to cut their ropes, the Admiral reminded us that we had raised our hands to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. He undergirded the sanctity of free speech, pointing out that these Americans were not the enemy and that we, the more powerful force, could pause for a moment to let them have their say, which we did. His decency came from a place of strength and confidence in what was right, fair, and just in the American experiment, and he counseled us with a smile that won us over.
Wanted to hear your just sort of reaction to that. It sounds very much like your what you just said in the previous answer, the model of just trying to be the right thing that was in the best interest of yourself, your family, obviously our patient. Seemed like in this particular instance that really came through. Obviously, one was very nice. Was interested to hear any recollections you have of this that day in particular.
I remember it quite well. And Chris Bott was one of the Navy's best and forward-looking specialists that had in a long time. Good man. I remember the incident like it was yesterday. I'm 83 years old. The battleship was going up the Columbia River to Portland for the Portland Rose Festival. And Battleship New Jersey had never been up there. It was a big deal for Portland to have somebody win its way up this river with a huge battleship. So at, what's the name of the bridge down there? But a bridge crossing the Columbia River, very close to the mouth of the river. There were, I think, 6 young people who had rappelled down from the bottom of the bridge in an effort to stop the battleship. So they were trying to block every course that we might take to transit under the bridge. And I was in my in-port cabin, and Captain Ron Tucker called down and said, "Admiral, I need some help. Can we come up to the bridge, please?" And I said, "Certainly." And I got up there, and I could see in front of us this huge bridge and 6 people hanging below the bridge. And he said, "What are we going to do?" And Chris Bott was there, so he knows the discussion we had. But when you get right down to it, I said, let's count from the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just drive right between number 4 and number 5. And he looked at me, he said, "Yes, sir." We drove through, and I said, "Put a couple of people up high, so if we get too close to someone, they can fend off. That is, swing the person out of the way." And I said, "I don't think you're going to have that problem." He said, "No, I think you're right. 4 and 5 is where we have the biggest gap, and we'll just go right through there." I said, "No, turn the radars off so they're not rotating." And then he said, "I got it." So we went right through. We pulled in to Longview, Washington, where we were going to spend the night rather than go up the river around after it was really dark. When we pulled alongside, I went ashore. My wife had come down to Longview and we were going to spend the night there because it was our anniversary. And as I stepped off the ship, all the TV stations were there, all the reporters. "Admiral, what do you think about those people hanging down from the bridge trying to stop the battleship?" I said, "Well, we're always accustomed to people hanging around trying to get a better look at the battleship." And that ran on the evening news in Portland and Seattle and LA too, I think. So that was an interesting day. The next morning we got up and took the ship all the way up the Willamette, or to the Willamette River, where the Columbia and the Willamette meet is Portland. And we had a absolutely delightful visit there, and got thousands of people to come aboard and visit the battleship. And that was not the decommissioning. That was just a visit to the Portland Rose Festival. We got underway, went back to Long Beach from there.
We mentioned Captain Ron Tucker a few times. The name of this podcast, WETSU, we look up.
Stuff. Eat the stuff up.
Was taken, as he told us, was taken a sort of monitor on this career. He brought with him ship to ship and see move from command to command. It was hatched on ship's last battle flag, the Maze. He flew, then the battleship left for dry dock in late March. And the Admiral shared a couple of those stories for us. Just wondering, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you also if there are any sort of WETSU moments or thoughts about Admiral Tucker for your time on the battleship. That's super.
Well, I think that motto, that acronym, was truly a badge of the imagination, of the leadership expertise, of the almost of the love and appreciation that the crew of New Jersey had for their captain. And they embraced uh, his acronym, and it became a what would I say, a universally attitude for how to accomplish things the right way the first time you attempt it. And so they did some very hard things. We went through some tremendously difficult weather situations. I remember on one, we hit a storm and it picked up the Admiral's barge, which was my boat, and impaled it on a stanchion. So it's a fiberglass boat that had a big steel stanchion going up through the middle. And, this was tough boat because we were going into maybe on the way to Guam. Things they would do is put my barge in the water so I could go ashore. So Ron said, this is a tough situation. I said, I know, Ron, but you'll figure it out. And so between that storm and arriving in Guam, he had his own boat repainted. His would have a gray hull, mine had a black hull. So he painted his boat black and painted it and put stars on it. So I got a new barge. He had a boat left with a hole in the bottom. But, WETSU was the motto of the people who were doing that work under adverse conditions at sea. You normally do these things in a big garage where you have paint drying lights and spray guns and so forth. They did it at sea. So when the boat was launched, he was right there next to me and said, WETSU.
That's a great story. Lastly, I'll ask you your feelings about what we're doing at the battleship as stewards of the ship on behalf of the 45,000 sailors and Marines who served on her. Obviously, the battleship is a museum and memorial now, and we have been for the last 25 years or so. Many of our veterans now serve in a different way, as does the battleship. Can you tell us your impression about what we're doing here at the battleship and how we're trying to keep history alive, and what you would like to see from the battleship going forward over the next 25 years?
Well, I think you have a wonderful calling for a very difficult undertaking. Most people don't realize how difficult it is to maintain a ship. It's made out of steel. Steel rusts. Now, the Navy figured this out a long time ago, and that's why we paint ships. But paint is not forever. Steel that's painted is forever because it doesn't rust if it's properly painted. So you have undertaken a project that will go on for years and years and years. And you've done it in such a way that the community appreciates it, the Navy appreciates it, history appreciates it, and you're being emulated. I had a hand in getting to Wisconsin and to Norfolk, and since then they've moved to Missouri to Pearl Harbor, and Iowa, I guess, is in Los Angeles now. So you're being emulated, and that's the highest form of praise. You're doing something that's really important to America and to Americans, not just those who serve. Ships are unique examples of what this nation can do. They're machines that no one can get their head around how it was built. When you see it in dry dock, you look up and you say, how'd they do that? And you look at the screws, the propellers, and you say, how do they make those? Well, it's American ingenuity that's been in place for a long time, but it gets better every year. So we make better screws now than we did in 1902. We make better paint now than we did. And the bottom paint on New Jersey now will probably last 50 years, whereas the last paint only lasted 30 years. But it's just a sign of what Americans can do with their ingenuity and their intense focus and interest in education and technology. They're one of a kind. So she's great. She'll
Admiral Paul Reason, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We are forever grateful for your service to the USS New Jersey and, of course, to our nation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. And it's good to meet you, Marshall and Ryan, and to know that the battleship's in good hands. Keep her going.
Thanks.
You bet.